Lieutenant Vera Katri had survived 3 tours in the Outer Rim conflicts, faced down plasma cannons with nothing but a combat knife, and once held a breach in the hull of a transport ship with her bare hands for 47 minutes. Yet somehow, the most dangerous thing she'd encountered in her military career was apparently a glass of water. She stared at the containment pod that had been installed in her quarters, aboard the Galactic Alliance starship Celestial Voyager. The transparent aluminum chamber was roughly the size of a small closet, equipped with its own air filtration system, emergency beacon, and what appeared to be a miniature laboratory for testing atmospheric composition. A single chair sat in the center, surrounded by control panels that blinked ominously in the dim light. "This is where I'm supposed to sleep?" Vera asked, though she already knew the answer. Commander Zell, a tall, reptilian Sylvac with emerald scales and vertical pupils, shifted uncomfortably. His forked tongue flicked out briefly before he spoke. "The Xenobiology Department has been quite clear about the protocols, Lieutenant. Humans are fragile when it comes to ambient moisture. Even trace amounts of water vapor in the ship's atmosphere could prove fatal." Vera nodded slowly, suppressing the urge to mention that she was roughly 60% water by mass. That particular fact had not gone over well during her initial briefing. "And the hazmat suit, mandatory for any movement outside your quarters." Zell gestured to the bulky, environmental suit hanging near the door. It looked like something designed for exploring the heart of a gas giant. Dr. Teflon insisted on the military-grade protection after reviewing the human physiological data. "Right." Vera picked up the helmet, noting its weight. She'd worn power armor that was lighter. "And how exactly am I supposed to fulfill my duties as liaison officer while sealed in this thing?" Zell's scales shifted to a darker shade of green, which Vera had learned indicated anxiety among his species. "The captain has expressed similar concerns. However, the safety protocols are non-negotiable. We cannot risk exposing you to potentially lethal environmental hazards." After Zell left, Vera sat on the edge of her regulation cot and pulled out her personal water bottle. The metal container was one of the few items she'd been allowed to bring aboard, without extensive decontamination procedures. She took a long drink, savoring the cool liquid as it slid down her throat. Outside her quarters, she could hear the soft hum of the ship's atmospheric processors machines that were apparently working overtime to keep the humidity levels in her section below what the Alliance considered the human death threshold. The irony wasn't lost on her. Earth's ancient oceans had given birth to life itself, and here she was surrounded by beings who believed that same life-giving substance would dissolve her on contact. The next morning brought Vera's first official protocol briefing. The conference room had been modified for the occasion, with a special sealed observation booth installed along one wall. Through the transparent barrier, she could see Captain Dracor, a massive reptilian, whose species resembled the ancient dragons of human mythology, complete with ridged scales and intimidating amber eyes. Beside him sat First Officer Lickle, a Tavarian whose insectoid features and chitinous exoskeleton gave him the appearance of a praying mantis crossed with a diplomat. Dr. Teflon, the ship's chief medical officer, stood at the front of the room with a holographic display showing what appeared to be molecular diagrams. His species, the crystalline Quan, communicated through harmonic resonances in their mineral bodies, which the universal translators rendered in a voice that sounded like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "As you can observe," Dr. Teflon chimed, "human cellular structure exhibits an alarming susceptibility to hydrogen-oxygen compounds. Note the permeable membrane structures here and here. Even minimal exposure to H2O in its liquid form could result in catastrophic cellular breakdown." Vera raised her hand from inside her observation booth. "Doctor, if I may ask, where exactly did this data come from?" The crystalline being's facets caught the light as he turned toward her. "Alliance Xenobiology archives compiled from first contact protocols established during initial human diplomatic outreach. Your own species provided extensive warnings about the dangers of water exposure." Vera tried to remember her briefings about early human alliance contact. Most of the documentation had been classified above her clearance level. Indeed, human representatives were quite emphatic about the lethal nature of liquid water. They requested special atmospheric controls for all diplomatic facilities and warned that even brief exposure could result in immediate cellular damage. Vera blinked. Someone had clearly gotten their wires crossed during first contact, but explaining that would require her to essentially tell the Alliance's top xenobiologists that they'd been operating under a massive misunderstanding for years. She decided to take a different approach. Doctor, hypothetically speaking, what would happen if a human were accidentally exposed to water? The room fell silent. Captain Dracor leaned forward in his chair, amber eyes fixed on her, with the intensity of a predator. Dr. Teflon's harmonic resonance dropped to what could only be described as horrified. The theoretical exposure scenarios are quite disturbing, Dr. Teflon replied. Immediate cellular liquefaction followed by rapid systemic breakdown. Death would be instantaneous, but the process would be highly corrosive to surrounding materials. Corrosive. Human biochemistry, when compromised by water exposure, becomes highly acidic. The theoretical dissolution could damage ship's hull integrity, contaminate life support systems, and pose a significant hazard to crew members. Vera looked around the room at the assembled officers, all of whom were staring at her, with expressions ranging from sympathy to barely concealed terror. These beings genuinely believed that she was a walking chemical weapon, held in check only by careful environmental controls. Well, she said finally, good thing we have these protocols in place then. The briefing continued for another hour, covering everything from emergency decontamination procedures to the special sealed transport pods that would be required if Vera needed to move between sections of the ship. By the end, she felt less like a diplomatic liaison and more like a particularly dangerous piece of cargo. That afternoon, as Vera sat in her quarters reviewing diplomatic files, the ship's alarm system activated. Red lights flashed throughout the corridor outside her door, and the universal translator crackled to life with an emergency announcement. All crew to emergency stations. Atmospheric contamination detected in sections 7 through 12. Repeat, atmospheric contamination detected. This is not a drill. Through her door's viewport, Vera could see crew members running past in full environmental suits. The ship's internal sensors would have automatically triggered the contamination protocols the moment they detected any increase in atmospheric humidity. What the crew probably didn't realize was that the contamination was likely nothing more than a minor leak in the ship's water recycling system. Her door chimed and Vera opened it to find First Officer Lickle standing in the corridor, his insectoid features barely visible through his helmet's faceplate. Lieutenant Catry, we need to evacuate you to the emergency safe room immediately. The contamination appears to be water vapor, and current atmospheric readings show potentially lethal levels throughout the affected sections. How lethal are we talking? Lickle consulted a handheld device. 17 parts per million and rising. According to our protocols, anything above 15 parts per million poses an immediate threat to human life. Vera tried not to laugh. Earth's atmosphere contained roughly 20,000 parts per million of water vapor on a good day. First Officer, what's the situation on the bridge? Captain Dracor has ordered a full evacuation of the affected areas. We're attempting to isolate the leak and begin atmospheric scrubbing procedures, but the engineering teams can't approach the source while contamination levels remain this high. Where is the leak located? Section 9, near the primary atmospheric processing unit. The contamination is spreading through the ventilation system faster than we can contain it. Vera made a decision that would have horrified Dr. Teflon. I need to get to the bridge. Absolutely not. The contamination levels there are approaching 30 parts per million. It would be suicide. First Officer, I'm going to share something with you that might change your perspective on human biology. Vera reached into her quarters and grabbed her water bottle. Before Lickle could react, she unscrewed the cap and took a long drink. The Tavarian's compound eyes widened in horror. He stumbled backward, reaching for his emergency communicator. Medical emergency, medical emergency. The human has been exposed to liquid H2O. I repeat, we have accidental water exposure. Vera held up her hand. Lickle, look at me, I'm fine. But the cellular liquefaction, the corrosive effects, have been greatly exaggerated. Vera took another sip from her bottle. Humans don't dissolve when we touch water. In fact, we're made mostly of the stuff. Lickle's translator was struggling to process what he was seeing. His species communicated through a combination of chemical pheromones and rapid antenna movements, neither of which translated well to human understanding. What came through the universal translator was a series of confused clicks and mathematical equations. If you could dissolve ship hull plating, Vera said gently, don't you think I would have mentioned that during my orientation? The bridge of the Celestial Voyager was in chaos when Vera arrived. Half the crew had evacuated to sealed emergency stations, while the other half remained at their posts, wearing full environmental protection. The air had a slight humid quality that reminded Vera of summer mornings back on Earth. Captain Dracor turned as she entered his massive frame, bristling with alarm. Lieutenant Catry, what are you doing here? The atmospheric contamination is well within human tolerance levels, Vera interrupted. She walked to the environmental control station and checked the readings. 37 parts per million. Captain, I've breathed air with humidity levels 1,000 times higher than this. That's impossible. Our xenobiology data clearly indicates... Vera pulled out her water bottle again and took another drink, this time more dramatically. The bridge fell silent, except for the hum of life support systems and the distant sound of what might have been Dr. Teflon's crystalline structure, resonating in panic from somewhere in the medical bay. Captain, I believe there may have been some miscommunication during first contact between humans and the Alliance. We don't dissolve in water. We drink it. We swim in it. We shower in it every day. Captain Dracor's amber eyes narrowed. You're saying our entire containment protocol is unnecessary? I'm saying that if you give me 5 minutes with the environmental controls, I can fix your leak without any of your crew risking exposure to what they consider a hazardous atmosphere. The reptilian captain studied her for a long moment. Finally, he gestured toward the environmental station. Proceed, Lieutenant. But if you begin to show any signs of cellular breakdown, we're implementing immediate containment procedures. The leak turned out to be a simple seal failure in one of the atmospheric recycling units. Vera located it within minutes by following the source of the increased humidity. The repair required nothing more than replacing a worn gasket and recalibrating the system's pressure sensors. Work that should have taken any competent engineer about 10 minutes, but would have required the crew to spend hours in decontamination procedures just to approach the problem. As she worked, Vera became aware that she was being watched. Through the transparent aluminum barriers that separated the contaminated section from the rest of the ship, she could see dozens of crew members observing her. Word had apparently spread quickly about the human who could survive direct water exposure. When she finished the repair, Vera returned to the bridge to find the senior staff assembled in what appeared to be an emergency meeting. The atmospheric readings had returned to normal levels, and the red alert had been canceled. Lieutenant Captain Dracor said, "We need to discuss your capabilities." My capabilities? If humans can indeed tolerate water exposure, as you claim, it suggests that Alliance protocols regarding your species may require significant revision. First Officer Lickle leaned forward. The implications are considerable. There are dozens of environments that we've classified as uninhabitable for humans, based on atmospheric moisture content. Entire worlds that we assumed would be off-limits for human colonies. Not to mention, Captain Dracor added, the tactical applications. If humans can operate in water-rich environments, it provides the Alliance with significant strategic advantages in conflicts with species that consider such environments hazardous. Vera nodded slowly. Captain, there's something else you should know. The tactical applications go beyond environmental tolerance. Explain. Instead of explaining, Vera reached into her utility kit and pulled out a small emergency blade. Before anyone could react, she made a shallow cut across her palm and held up her hand, letting a few drops of blood fall onto the deck plating. The bridge erupted in alarm. Dr. Teflon's harmonic resonance reached frequencies that threatened to shatter the transparent aluminum barriers. Security officers reached for their weapons before realizing they had no idea what to do about a human bleeding. Human blood, Vera announced calmly, is approximately 60% water. If you want to keep believing that water is a corrosive hazard to other species, I'm not going to argue with you. The implications sank in slowly. If Alliance species genuinely believed that water was dangerous, and if they believed that human fluids were highly corrosive, then humans had just become the most intimidating species in the galaxy without firing a single shot. Captain Dracor's rumbling voice broke the silence. Lieutenant Katri, report to my ready room. We need to discuss your new role aboard this vessel. Over the following days, word of the water incident spread throughout the ship. Vera found herself regarded with a mixture of awe and terror by crew members who had previously seen her as a fragile diplomatic curiosity. The absurd containment protocols were quietly abandoned, replaced by what Dr. Teflon termed enhanced safety observations, which basically meant that someone would check on her twice a day to make sure she hadn't accidentally killed herself with hydration. The real test came 3 weeks later, when the Celestial Voyager received a distress call from a research station in the Kepler system. The station's automated message was brief and alarming: critical system failure, life support compromised, immediate evacuation required. When they arrived, they found the research station, Dark Harbor, floating lifeless in space. The facility was a joint Alliance scientific venture, housing 27 researchers from various species, working on atmospheric terraforming projects. According to the emergency beacon, a catastrophic failure in the station's environmental systems had flooded the entire facility with water vapor from a ruptured terraforming tank. Atmospheric readings show humidity levels approaching 90% throughout the station, reported Commander Zell from the sensor station. Fatal exposure levels for most Alliance species. The entire facility is essentially uninhabitable. Captain Dracor studied the tactical display. What about the survivors? Emergency life support is functioning in 3 sections, but humidity levels are increasing even there. We estimate 6 hours before the contamination reaches lethal levels in the safe areas. Transportation options. Negative. The docking bays are completely flooded with water vapor. Any rescue shuttle entering the station would be contaminated beyond safe operational parameters. Vera looked up from her tactical analysis. Captain requesting permission to lead a rescue operation. The bridge fell silent. Dr. Teflon's harmonic resonance dropped to barely audible levels. Even the ship's AI seemed to pause in its constant background processing. Lieutenant, Captain Dracor said carefully, the atmospheric readings indicate water vapor concentrations that would be instantly fatal to any Alliance species. Even with full environmental protection, our rescue teams couldn't survive more than minutes in that environment. But I could. You're proposing to enter a facility with 90% atmospheric humidity. Captain, I've lived in climates with higher humidity than that. The only real danger would be if the temperature gets too high, but the station's emergency readings show the environmental systems are maintaining normal thermal ranges. First Officer Lickle leaned forward. Even if you could survive the atmospheric conditions, how would you navigate the station? The water vapor concentration would be too dense for most standard equipment to function properly. Vera smiled. Humans have been navigating in high-moisture environments for thousands of years. We call it fog. And as for equipment, anything that can function underwater should work fine in water vapor. The rescue operation was unlike anything in Alliance military history. Vera suited up in a lightweight environmental suit designed for underwater operations, equipped with standard human diving gear that seemed absurdly primitive compared to the advanced technology usually required for hazardous environment rescue missions. As she approached the station's docking bay, Vera could see the water vapor streaming from damaged atmospheric vents, creating clouds that sparkled in the artificial lights. To her, it looked like nothing more than a heavy morning fog. To the Alliance crew watching from the celestial Voyager, it looked like a toxic hellscape that would dissolve any living being in seconds. Inside the station, Vera found herself moving through corridors filled with dense, humid air that her suit's external cameras couldn't penetrate. She switched to manual navigation using the station's emergency lighting and her own knowledge of standard Alliance facility layouts to find her way to the safe areas. The first group of survivors was huddled in an emergency shelter in Section C7. Researchers from various species, wearing full environmental protection and looking terrified. When Vera's voice came through their communicators identifying herself as a human rescue operative, several of them refused to believe that anyone could have survived passage through the contaminated areas. "This is Dr. Velian of the Quan research team," came a harmonic voice through the comm system. "How is it possible that you're operating in Section C? Atmospheric readings show water vapor concentrations of 87%. Doctor, I'm going to need you to trust me on this one. Can you and your team move to the emergency airlock? I'll escort you back to the docking bay." Through the contaminated corridors. Through what you consider contaminated corridors. From my perspective, it's just a little humid. The evacuation took 4 hours. Vera made 7 trips through the station, each time escorting groups of survivors through corridors that they considered death traps. By the time she reached the last group, word had spread among the survivors about the human who could walk through water vapor unprotected. The final group was trapped in the station's central laboratory, where the initial environmental failure had occurred. The room was essentially a sauna with water vapor so thick that visibility was reduced to mere feet. The scientists inside 3 Silvacs and 2 Tavarians had been trapped there for nearly 8 hours. "This is Lieutenant Katri," Vera announced as she entered the lab. "I'm here to get you out." Through the comm system, she could hear one of the Silvacs sobbing with relief. "The human operative. We thought it was impossible. How are you surviving this environment?" "It's complicated," Vera replied, looking around the lab. The terraforming equipment that had failed was still venting water vapor into the room, creating a continuous cloud of moisture that would have been considered lethal to any Alliance species. "Can you all move to the emergency exit?" As they made their way through the station, one of the Tavarian researchers, Dr. Kef, asked the question that everyone was thinking. "Lieutenant, our species has studied human physiology for years. The Alliance Xenobiology database clearly indicates that water exposure is fatal to humans. How is it possible that you're not only surviving, but operating effectively in these conditions?" Vera paused in the corridor, surrounded by the thick water vapor that the Alliance considered a toxic hazard. "Doctor, what if I told you that everything the Alliance thinks it knows about human biology is wrong?" "I would say that's impossible. The data came from your own species during first contact." "And what if I told you that humans aren't just tolerant of water exposure, but that we actually require it to survive?" The silence that followed was broken only by the hiss of escaping water vapor and the quiet hum of life support systems. "That would mean," Dr. Kef said slowly, "that humans are even more alien than we thought." When they returned to the celestial Voyager, the rescued scientists were taken to medical for examination and debriefing. Vera, meanwhile, found herself summoned to Captain Dracor's ready room for what she suspected would be a very interesting conversation. The captain's quarters were decorated with artifacts from his homeworld, including what appeared to be the preserved skull of some massive predator. Dracor himself was seated behind his desk, his amber eyes reflecting the light from several data displays showing the rescue operation statistics. 27 lives saved, he said without preamble. 0 casualties. Mission accomplished in 4 hours, compared to our estimated timeline of 12 to 16 hours, using standard Alliance rescue protocols. "Thank you, Captain." "Don't thank me yet, Lieutenant. I have questions." Vera took a seat across from him. "I imagine you do." First question. What else has the Alliance gotten wrong about human capabilities? That's a complicated question, Captain. How much time do you have? Dracor leaned back in his chair, which creaked under his massive frame. As much as it takes. Over the next hour, Vera explained the reality of human biology and capabilities. She described Earth's water-rich environment, human recreational activities like swimming and sailing, and the fact that humans not only tolerated high-humidity environments, but often preferred them. She explained human dietary habits, including the consumption of liquids that were primarily water. Captain Dracor listened without interruption, occasionally making notes on a personal data pad. When she finished, he was quiet for several minutes. "Lieutenant," he said finally, "you're telling me that humans are essentially aquatic beings who can operate on land." That's not entirely inaccurate. And that the Alliance has been treating your species as fragile and requiring dangerous containment procedures for no reason. Correct. And that if other species knew the truth about human water tolerance, it could significantly change the balance of power in regions where high humidity or water-rich environments are considered strategic obstacles. Vera nodded. Also correct. Dracor stood and walked to the viewport, looking out at the stars. "Lieutenant Catry, I'm promoting you to Chief Tactical Advisor for Human Environment Operations. I'm also recommending you for the Alliance Merit of Valor for the rescue operation." "Thank you, Captain." "Don't thank me. I'm also assigning you a new primary duty." "Which is?" "You're going to help me rewrite Alliance protocols for human integration. If your species can operate in environments that we consider uninhabitable, then we need to completely reconsider how humans fit into Alliance strategic planning." The changes came gradually but steadily. Dr. Teflon, after extensive consultations with human medical databases, issued a revised report on human physiology that corrected most of the misconceptions about water exposure. The containment protocols were officially abandoned, replaced by what the Alliance termed enhanced operational parameters, which basically acknowledged that humans could go places and do things that other species couldn't. Vera's quarters were renovated, removing the containment pod and adding what Captain Dracor diplomatically referred to as specialized human recreational facilities. The ship's AI had installed a small pool in one corner of the room, complete with what appeared to be a tiny waterfall. It was, Vera realized, probably the first swimming pool ever installed aboard an Alliance military vessel. The real change, however, was in how the crew interacted with her. The fearful distance that had characterized her early days aboard the ship was replaced by curiosity and respect. Officers who had once crossed corridors to avoid her now sought her out for advice on human culture and capabilities. First Officer Lickle became particularly interested in human water-based recreation. During off-duty hours, he would visit Vera's quarters to observe her swimming, taking detailed notes for what he claimed was a xenobiology research project, but which seemed more like genuine fascination. "The biomechanics are remarkable," he observed during one such visit. "Your species has developed locomotive techniques specifically adapted for high-density fluid environments. Lickle, we call it swimming. Humans have been doing it for thousands of years." "Yes, but the implications for Alliance naval operations. If humans can operate effectively in aquatic environments, it opens up entirely new tactical possibilities." The tactical possibilities became relevant sooner than anyone expected. 3 months after the rescue operation, the Celestial Voyager received new orders from Alliance Command. They were being deployed to the Hydros sector, where Alliance forces were engaged in a territorial dispute with the Vexar Confederation. The Vexar were a militaristic species that had evolved on a desert world and shared the Alliance's general belief that water-rich environments were hazardous. This had given them a strategic advantage in the conflict, as they could use water-based defensive systems that Alliance forces couldn't easily counter. Intelligence reports indicate that the Vexar have fortified their positions using atmospheric water generators, Captain Dracor explained during the mission briefing. They're essentially creating artificial humid zones around their installations, making them inaccessible to most Alliance species. "What about environmental suits?" asked Commander Zell. "The Vexar have proven remarkably effective at targeting life support systems. Environmental protection that works in vacuum or standard hazardous atmospheres fails quickly under sustained enemy fire." Vera studied the tactical displays. "Captain, what's the humidity level in these defensive zones?" "Intelligence estimates between 70 and 90% atmospheric moisture." "That's well within human operational parameters." The bridge fell silent. Everyone was thinking the same thing, but no one wanted to be the first to suggest it. Finally, Captain Dracor spoke. "Lieutenant Catry, I'm not going to order you to undertake what amounts to a solo mission into enemy territory." "You're not ordering me, Captain. I'm volunteering." The assault on the Vexar forward base at Hydros III was unlike anything in Alliance military history. While the main fleet engaged the enemy's outer defenses, Vera approached the fortified installation in a small stealth-equipped shuttle designed for aquatic operations. The Vexar defensive systems were impressive. They had surrounded their base with a cloud of water vapor so dense that most sensors couldn't penetrate it. Alliance fighters attempting to approach the installation found their life support systems overwhelmed within minutes, forcing them to retreat. For Vera, flying through the defensive cloud was like navigating through a particularly thick fog bank. Her shuttle systems designed for underwater operations functioned perfectly in the high-moisture environment. She was able to approach the Vexar installation undetected, using the very defensive system that was designed to keep Alliance forces at bay. The base itself was built into a natural cave system, with the entrance hidden behind a waterfall of vaporized coolant. Vera landed her shuttle in a small clearing and proceeded on foot wearing the same lightweight suit she had used for the research station rescue. Inside the cave system, she found the Vexar Command Center surprisingly lightly defended. The aliens had become so confident in their water-based defenses that they hadn't prepared for the possibility of an attacker who could operate effectively in a high-moisture environment. The mission parameters called for intelligence gathering rather than direct assault. Vera made her way through the facility, documenting defensive systems and troop positions. She was preparing to extract when an alarm began blaring throughout the complex. The Vexar had detected her shuttle. Security teams were converging on the entrance, and Vera could hear the distinctive sound of Vexar energy weapons charging. She found herself trapped in the command center, with no clear route to escape. That was when she remembered the tactical applications that Captain Dracor had mentioned months earlier. Vera activated her emergency communicator and broadcast on the standard Alliance military frequency. "This is Lieutenant Catry to Vexar Command. I'm transmitting from inside your installation." The response came in accented but clear Alliance standard. "Unknown operative, you are in violation of Confederation territory. Surrender immediately or face immediate termination." "I'm afraid I can't do that," Vera replied. "You see, I'm human." There was a pause. "Explain the relevance of your species designation." "Humans are biological chemical weapons. Our bodies are 60% water, which, as you know, is highly corrosive to most life forms. I'm currently bleeding from a combat injury sustained during my infiltration." This was true. Vera had cut herself on a sharp edge while navigating the cave system. The wound was minor, but the psychological effect on the Vexar would be significant. "If your security teams attempt to capture me," she continued, "my death would result in the release of approximately 40 liters of highly corrosive fluid into your facility's atmosphere. The contamination would spread through your ventilation system within minutes." The silence that followed was absolute. Additionally, Vera added, "I should mention that Alliance forces are currently monitoring this transmission. If I fail to report in within the next 10 minutes, my commanding officer will assume that I've been killed, and my chemical payload has been released. Alliance protocol for human biochemical contamination requires immediate orbital bombardment of the affected area." This was completely false, but Vera was counting on the Vexar's limited knowledge of Alliance military procedures. "What are your terms?" came the eventual response. immediate cessation of hostile activities in this sector, and withdrawal of Confederation forces to positions outside the hydro system. That is unacceptable. Then I suppose we'll see how well your ventilation system handles human biochemistry. The negotiations took 27 minutes. In the end, the Vexar agreed to a tactical withdrawal from 3 key systems in exchange for Vera's peaceful departure and a guarantee that no additional human operatives would be deployed to the sector. When she returned to the Celestial Voyager, Vera found the entire crew assembled in the main hangar bay. Captain Dracor stood at the front holding what appeared to be an official Alliance commendation. "Lieutenant Vera Catry," he announced, "for exceptional service in the face of enemy action and for innovations in cross-species tactical operations, you are hereby awarded the Alliance Star of Merit and promoted to the rank of Commander." The ceremony was surprisingly moving, with representatives from every species aboard the ship participating in their own cultural traditions of recognition. The Quan crystalline crew members created harmonic resonances that filled the hangar with beautiful music. The Tavarians performed a ritual dance that involved rapid antenna movements and complex geometric patterns. The Silvax presented her with a carved scale that, according to their tradition, symbolized adoption into their warrior caste. Afterward, in the privacy of Captain Dracor's ready room, Vera asked the question that had been bothering her since the first day aboard the ship. "Captain, how exactly did the Alliance get such wrong information about human biology during first contact?" Dracor was quiet for a moment, studying a datapad that contained what appeared to be historical records. The initial contact team included several humans who were overly cautious about revealing human capabilities. Meaning they deliberately exaggerated human environmental vulnerabilities to ensure that Alliance worlds would implement extensive safety protocols for human visitors. Vera stared at him. "They lied about our biology to make sure we'd be treated carefully." According to the records, the human diplomatic team was concerned that if Alliance species knew the full extent of human adaptability, they might view humans as a potential threat rather than potential allies. So they convinced everyone that we were fragile and needed special protection, which worked perfectly until a human demonstrated otherwise by drinking water in front of Alliance xenobiologists. Vera laughed, a sound that still seemed to surprise some of the alien crew members. "Captain, has anyone told the Alliance Council the truth about human capabilities?" "Commander Catry, that's going to be your next assignment. Alliance Command wants you to return to Central Station to brief the Council on human tactical applications and recommend revisions to first contact protocols." The assignment turned out to be more complex than Vera had anticipated. The Alliance Council consisted of representatives from 47 different species, each with their own understanding of human biology, based on years of careful study of incorrect data. Convincing them that everything they thought they knew was wrong required more diplomacy than Vera had expected. The breakthrough came during her third presentation, when she offered to demonstrate human water tolerance in person. The council chambers were modified to include a sealed observation area, where representatives could watch safely, while Vera sat in an environment with 95% humidity, and demonstrated various human activities, including drinking water, eating foods with high water content, and even swimming in a temporary pool. The political implications were enormous. If humans could operate in environments that other species considered uninhabitable, it would require a complete revision of territorial agreements, colonization protocols, and military strategic planning. More importantly, it meant that the Alliance now had access to entire categories of worlds and environments that had previously been considered off-limits. Water-rich planets that had been bypassed as uninhabitable could now be developed. Ocean worlds that had been ignored could be explored. Even simple things like weather patterns on habitable worlds could be managed using water-based atmospheric systems. The cultural exchange that followed was remarkable. As word spread throughout the Alliance about human capabilities, Vera found herself fielding requests from xenobiologists, engineers, and even recreational specialists who wanted to understand how humans had adapted to water-rich environments. Dr. Teflon, who had been mortified by his initial misdiagnosis of human physiology, became one of the most enthusiastic advocates for human alliance cooperation. He established a new research program focused on understanding how different species could learn from human environmental adaptation techniques. The Tavarians developed an entire new field of study around human biomechanics in fluid environments. First Officer Lickle published several papers on human swimming techniques and their potential applications for Alliance naval operations. Even the Quan, whose crystalline physiology made them naturally incompatible with high-moisture environments, found ways to incorporate human environmental expertise into their own research on atmospheric engineering. The changes went beyond just scientific understanding. Vera noticed that the way other species interacted with humans began to shift. The protective caution that had characterized early human alliance relationships was replaced by a kind of respectful amazement. Humans weren't seen as fragile beings requiring special care, but as remarkably adaptable allies, capable of operating in environments that most other species found hostile. 6 months after her return to Central Station, Vera received orders for a new assignment. The Alliance was establishing a specialized response unit for operations in extreme environments, and they wanted her to command it. The unit, officially designated as the Environmental Operations Division, was made up of specialists from various species, each selected for their ability to operate in conditions that were considered hazardous to standard Alliance personnel. Vera was the only human, but she was joined by crystalline Quan, who could operate in high-radiation environments, aquatic Delphians, who could work underwater, and even a few Vexar, who had proven surprisingly adaptable to extreme temperature variations. Their first mission took them to a disaster zone in the Epsilon sector, where a terraforming accident had created a planet-wide storm system that was dumping unprecedented amounts of rain on a developing colony. The environmental conditions were so severe that most Alliance species couldn't survive on the planet's surface for more than a few minutes. For Vera, it was like returning to Earth during monsoon season. She led the rescue operation personally, wading through flooded colony buildings and swimming through submerged sections to reach trapped colonists. Her team worked around the clock for 3 days, evacuating over 2,000 beings of various species from what they considered a toxic environment, but which reminded Vera of summer afternoons by Earth's lakes and rivers. The success of the operation led to more assignments, each one showcasing how human environmental adaptability could be leveraged for Alliance benefit. They rescued researchers from a space station flooded by a coolant leak. They established temporary bases on high-humidity worlds that had been considered uninhabitable. They even developed new protocols for Alliance naval operations that took advantage of human comfort in aquatic environments. But perhaps the most significant change was in how humans were perceived throughout the Alliance. The species that had once been seen as requiring special protection was now recognized as uniquely capable of operating in some of the most challenging environments in known space. Vera often thought about the irony of the situation during quiet moments in her quarters aboard the new Alliance vessel, Resilient Explorer. The ship had been designed specifically for environmental operations, with facilities that could accommodate species with radically different physiological requirements. Her own quarters included both a standard living area and what the ship's designers diplomatically called a human environmental chamber, which was essentially a suite with its own swimming pool and humidity controls. The chamber had become something of a curiosity for visiting dignitaries and crew members from other species. Vera had grown accustomed to giving impromptu demonstrations of human water tolerance, showing off swimming techniques that Alliance engineers were already adapting for underwater construction projects. During one such demonstration, she was visited by Ambassador Krell, a Silvac diplomat who had been present during her original briefing about human capabilities. "Commander," he said, watching her practice what humans called freestyle swimming, "I have a question that has been troubling me since your first demonstration." "What's that, Ambassador?" "If humans have always been capable of operating in high-moisture environments, And if your species has been swimming and diving for thousands of years, why didn't you correct our misconceptions immediately upon joining the Alliance?" Vera paused in her swimming, floating in the center of the pool, while she considered the question. "Ambassador, imagine that you were the first of your people to encounter an alien species. Imagine that those aliens seem to believe that something perfectly normal to you, something as basic as breathing, was actually deadly dangerous. Would you immediately tell them they were wrong, or would you first try to understand why they believed something so obviously incorrect?" "I would seek to understand their perspective. And what if you discovered that their belief, however incorrect, was actually protecting you? What if you realized that by correcting their misunderstanding, you might lose some advantage or protection that their ignorance was providing?" Ambassador Krell's scales shifted to a thoughtful blue-green. "You're suggesting that early human diplomats deliberately maintained the deception because they believed it was beneficial. I'm suggesting that sometimes being underestimated can be a form of protection. If other species think you're fragile and need special care, they're less likely to see you as a threat." "But that strategy could only work temporarily." "True. Eventually the truth was going to come out. The question was whether it would happen under controlled circumstances or during some kind of crisis. And you chose to reveal the truth during a crisis." Vera smiled. "I chose to reveal the truth when it could save lives. The crisis just happened to provide the right opportunity." As her first year as commander of the Environmental Operations Division drew to a close, Vera found herself reflecting on how much had changed since that first day aboard the Celestial Voyager. The Alliance's understanding of human capabilities had been completely revised. New protocols had been established for human integration into extreme environment operations. Entire categories of worlds that had been considered uninhabitable were now being developed as human colonies. But perhaps most importantly, the relationship between humans and other Alliance species had evolved from one of protective condescension to one of mutual respect and partnership. Humans were no longer seen as fragile beings requiring special care, but as valuable allies with unique capabilities that complemented those of other species. The final test of this new relationship came during what became known as the Meridian Crisis. A rogue comet had impacted the ocean world of Meridian Prime, creating massive tsunami and flooding that threatened the planet's population of 12 million beings. The disaster was beyond the scope of any single species' emergency response capabilities. The Alliance mobilized the largest multi-species rescue operation in its history. Vera's Environmental Operations Division was deployed as the advance team tasked with establishing safe zones and evacuation routes in the flooded coastal regions. For most Alliance species, the mission was nearly impossible. The floodwaters contained high concentrations of salt and organic debris that made the environment toxic to anyone not specifically adapted for aquatic conditions. Standard environmental suits failed within hours due to the corrosive nature of the contaminated water. For Vera and her human team members, it was a large-scale version of every beach rescue operation in human history. They worked for 6 weeks establishing temporary shelters on high ground, evacuating survivors from flooded buildings, and coordinating with Alliance medical teams to treat refugees who had been exposed to what other species considered toxic flood conditions. Vera personally rescued over 300 beings during the operation, including several crystalline individuals whose mineral physiology made them particularly vulnerable to prolonged moisture exposure. The operation was a complete success. Casualty rates were significantly lower than projected, and the evacuation proceeded ahead of schedule. When the final transport ships departed Meridian Prime, they carried not only 12 million grateful survivors, but also a new understanding of what interspecies cooperation could accomplish. At the post-mission briefing, Captain Dracor, who had been promoted to Admiral and placed in command of Alliance Emergency Response Operations, made a comment that summarized the transformation that had taken place. "A year ago," he said, "we would have approached this mission by trying to protect humans from a hazardous environment. Today, we succeeded by deploying humans as our primary response team in that same environment. The difference wasn't in the environment or the technology. The difference was in our understanding of human capabilities. Vera's official commendation for the Meridian operation included a notation that would become standard in Alliance military records: exceptional service in environmental conditions considered unsurvivable by most Alliance species, demonstrating the strategic value of human physiological adaptation in crisis response scenarios. More personally, she received a message from Dr. Teflon that included an observation that made her smile. "Commander Katri, I have revised my assessment of human biochemistry. Your species is not only non-toxic when exposed to water, but appears to actually improve in efficiency when operating in high-moisture environments. I recommend immediate deployment of human personnel to any future crisis involving aquatic or humid conditions." The transformation was complete. Humans had gone from being seen as fragile beings, requiring protection from water, to being recognized as the Alliance's go-to species for any mission involving wet conditions. The fear that had once characterized alien reactions to human biology had been replaced by respect and partnership. As Vera stood on the observation deck of the Resilient Explorer, watching the stars and thinking about how much had changed, she realized that the most important lesson hadn't been about human biology or alien misconceptions. It had been about the power of understanding to overcome fear. The Alliance had been afraid of humans because they didn't understand human capabilities. Humans had been cautious about revealing their true abilities because they feared how other species might react. In both cases, fear had created barriers that understanding had eventually dissolved. Now, as she prepared for her next assignment, leading a joint human-alien team to establish research stations on ocean worlds throughout the Alliance, Vera reflected on the strange journey that had brought her from a contained diplomatic curiosity to the commander of the most specialized unit in Alliance history. She took a sip from her water bottle, the same one she had used to demonstrate human water tolerance during that first crisis aboard the Celestial Voyager. The simple act of drinking water had once been considered a potentially fatal exposure event. Now, it was recognized as evidence of humanity's remarkable environmental adaptability. The universe, Vera reflected, was full of possibilities that opened up when beings stopped being afraid of their differences and started learning from them instead. And somewhere in the Alliance's vast archives, there was probably still a file containing the original human diplomatic reports, warning about the deadly dangers of water exposure. She made a mental note to have that file updated the next time she was on Central Station. After all, the truth was always worth documenting, even when it took years to be properly understood.